Don't you love that hymn? Be thou the center of our least endeavor. That is a profound faith. Profound. As we look ahead to the start of a school year and another year of grow groups, I found myself thinking about what goals we have for our kids. Now, if you're a parent, you've probably already thought of that, or at least I hope you have. But when we think about that question, we so often answer with what career we want our kids to have. Or maybe things like, I would like them to be self-supporting, be happy, be active in their community, and maybe just moving out of your house. Well, those are really good things and things that we certainly aspire to for our kids. I believe that we also need to have a vision for our kids and youth spiritually. And that is to grow to know and love the Lord and to serve Him. And unless we consciously set a spiritual goal and pursue it, both as families and as a church, we're going to achieve what we aim for. Nothing. Now, there are two people in the Bible that I want us to look at today and then I want to offer some suggestions for things that we can do to raise spiritually healthy young people and a goal that we all can mutually aim for. We're familiar of the story of Joseph, and I think we're also familiar with the story of the prodigal son. And they provide two contrasting examples for us. First of all, there are a number of similarities in their stories. Both stories are about a father and a son. Both stories focus on a younger son. Both sons go to a far country, one by choice and the other by force as he's taken into slavery. Both sons end up in an environment where they face sexual temptation. There was a famine in both of the countries. Both sons worked for a citizen of that far country. Both fathers thought that they had lost their son. Joseph had a robe that was given him by his father at the beginning of the story. The prodigal received a robe from his father at the end of the story. The older brothers, in both cases, were jealous of both Joseph and the prodigal. In both cases, the older brothers were not happy to see Joseph and the prodigal son when they show up later on in the story. And in both cases, the father and the son had a joyous reunion, and their relationship was restored. So those are your similarities, but there are also some striking contrasts in these two stories. First of all, Joseph began his adult life in a foreign country as a slave. The prodigal ended up in the foreign country living like a slave. Joseph started in a foreign country with nothing, but the prodigal started life in a foreign country with great wealth. Joseph received evil that he did not deserve, but the prodigal received good that he didn't earn. Joseph gained wealth. The prodigal wasted wealth. Joseph ended in a foreign land with both wealth and honor. The prodigal ended in the foreign land with nothing but humiliation. Joseph repeatedly refused to commit adultery. The prodigal partied with prostitutes until his money was gone. With honor, Joseph brought his father and his whole family to him. And in disgrace, the prodigal crawled home to his father. And in the end, Joseph received a ring from the king, and the prodigal received a ring from his father. So which of these two models would you choose as a preferred outcome for your kids? Joseph exemplified godly wisdom at its best, and the prodigal exemplified human foolishness at its worst. So here's choice number one. My child will leave home before he's ready, waste all of his money, and mine too, on wild partying, will sleep with prostitutes, will end up with nothing, and will take care of pigs until he finally comes to his senses. Now, while some may say that kids have to learn the hard way, I would say that's a very low expectation to set for a kid. We don't want to go there as a parent or as a church. Here's choice number two. In the most difficult of circumstances, not brought on by himself, my child will have integrity in his work ethic, will repeatedly say no to the temptation of sin, will have faith in God through years of difficulty, will respond to every situation with wisdom, will become a capable, respected leader, will harbor no animosity to those who harmed him, and will provide for me in my old age. Well, number two is the obvious winner, and that was Joseph. How we as parents hope for our children to turn out, and how we as a church hope for our kids to turn out as well. Of course, I recognize that the response of the child is not entirely dependent on the parents. I recognize that. I get it. But the reality doesn't diminish our responsibility to do the best things that we possibly can to produce a Joseph-like outcome. So what are these things that I'm talking about? I am drawing material very freely from a book that Angie Mullen loaned me. It is called Raising a Modern-Day Joseph by Larry Fowler, and it's an Awana resource, but it has great material in it. Fowler suggests 5 master threads that are the foundation for building a spiritually strong child. If we instill these 5 characteristics in our kids, there is a better chance of them successfully navigating into adulthood. And these 5 master threads are respect, wisdom, grace, destiny, and perspective. So let's take a few minutes to look at each one of these and how we see it in Joseph's life. Master thread number 1 is respect. Genesis 39, verses 6 through 9, talks about Joseph's first rise to power in Potiphar's house. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So this passage shows us that Joseph had respect. First of all, he respected authority. He was determined not to do anything that would erode his master's trust in him. He saw the temptation with Potiphar's wife as a violation of his relationship with Potiphar and the authority that Potiphar had given him, and he refused to dishonor that. Second, He respected the sanctity of marriage. Joseph says, "You are his wife." Any hanky-panky with Mrs. Potiphar would violate that value system that respected marriage as a sacred relationship, a sacred covenant. Third, Joseph respected right and wrong. He says this would be a great wickedness. Joseph is saying this is just plain wrong. And finally, and most important, he respected God. He saw that a wrong against Potiphar was also a sin against God. Joseph had a worldview that interpreted daily circumstances in light of God's character and plans. He knew that this dalliance would be much more than violating a standard. It would also damage his relationship with God. So based on Joseph's example in this passage, we must teach our children to respect human authority, respect human relationships, respect God's standards, and respect God. Master Life thread number 2 is wisdom. After rejecting Mrs. Potiphar's advances, Joseph was thrown in jail unjustly. And we pick up his conversation in jail in Genesis chapter 40, verses 6 through 8. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers, who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why are your faces downcast today?" They said to him, "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." These words tell us a lot about Joseph. First of all, he saw God as the source of wisdom. "Do not interpretations belong to God?" he said. And although dream interpretation was a thing in Egyptian culture, similar to what it is in our culture now, Joseph knew that true wisdom had nothing to do with a culture or even with a profession as a dream interpreter, but with a relationship with God. He knew that God was the source of wisdom. We learn, too, that Joseph was confident in his relationship with the God of wisdom. He did not hesitate to interpret the dream, depending on God's wisdom. That is extraordinary confidence. Do our kids leave the nest? Do they leave your home knowing in their heart, confidently, that God is the source of wisdom and that they can personally rely on that wisdom? First, of course, they need to have that relationship. And second, we need to weave knowledge of Scripture into everyday training. So based on Joseph's example in this passage, our assignment is to teach our children to know that wisdom is based on God's truth. Build into them biblical foundations for wisdom. That is, teach them the Bible. And teach them to have confidence in relying on God's wisdom, the Bible. Master thread number 3. Fast forward a bit. Joseph has gotten out of jail and is now ruler and administrator over the land of Egypt. Joseph has, through God's wisdom, predicted the famine on the land and led the country in preparation and survival through that difficult time. And about this time, Joseph became a dad. He became a father. Now, in those times, a lot of thought was given to the significance of a name and the naming of a child. And the names of his children reflected the most important lessons that he had learned. Genesis 41, verses 51 and 52 tell us that Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. With Manasseh's name, Joseph tells us he's given up on bitterness and revenge. With Ephraim's name, we learn that he's gained grace and blessing. So Joseph demonstrated grace. Joseph had learned to give grace and mercy and forgiveness to receive blessing. Joseph had the power to take revenge for the wrongs that his brother had done to him, which makes his response even more remarkable. Where he could have punished those who hurt him, he chose instead to extend love and grace to those who had hurt him. Joseph forgot. The passage says that he forgot all his hardship in his father's house. So instead of nursing a grudge, Joseph, with God's help, forgave and forgot. Joseph received grace. Joseph could have claimed that all his great success was due to his fabulous good looks and exceptional skills. Yet he didn't do that. Instead, he recognized and talked about that all the good happening to him came from God. Joseph gave God all the glory. So we learn from this passage that we need to teach our children to respond with grace and mercy when they are wronged. We need to teach them to view good things as they enjoy them as coming from the grace of God. Master life thread number 4 is destiny. We move ahead again some years in Joseph's life to when his brothers came to Egypt to buy grain during the famine. Who could have predicted the masterful way that God wove together the evil done to Joseph into having Joseph at the right place at the right time? Genesis 45 tells us, "So Joseph said to his brothers, 'Come near to me, please.' And they came near, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither planting nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, "Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and your flocks, your herds, and all that you have." What an astounding passage. Joseph had a sense of destiny. By now, he had a clear picture of God's call on his life. He knew that his life had purpose. It had a very specific purpose. And there was a reason for all he had endured in God's perfect plan. Joseph also knew that his destiny was God's to choose. Joseph would never have chosen the path his life took. Yet, he clearly saw that God mapped out his life journey. Joseph repeats the words and the thought 3 times in this short passage. God sent me. God sent me. The role of a Christian parent is to give a sense of destiny that's more specific than we find in the world. Secular authorities tell us to help our children find their destiny. But Christian parents are to raise their children to find their destiny in the will and calling of God. So we learn from this episode in Joseph's life that we must transfer a sense of destiny to our children, and we must make it clear that destiny is found in following the calling and will of God. And finally, we come to master thread number 5, perspective. Perspective. We move ahead a few more years, and all of Joseph's family is now in Egypt. The time came when Jacob, the father, died, and Joseph's brothers got a bit concerned about how that death might affect their situation. Genesis 50 tells us, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. You know, perspective is so critical in our lives. Joseph repeats in this passage his sense of destiny, and then directed attention to God's plan and sovereignty. He made these points. He recognized it was his brother's intent to harm him. But you know what? God's righteous plan overruled the brothers' evil plan. And in fact, he actually used their plan to accomplish his purposes. Joseph also tells them that he plans to align his future actions with God's plan by providing for his brothers and their children. So we learn from this episode in Joseph's life that we must teach our kids that God is in control. We must also teach them to interpret life's events in light of God's sovereignty. You know, things will go wrong for them. Things they didn't cause and have absolutely no control over. But it's how they respond that really matters, by recognizing that God is in control even in the tough times. So those are your 5 master threads: respect, wisdom, grace, destiny, and perspective. I challenge you to weave these 5 characteristics into every part of your child's spiritual education. Weave them into every part of life, both yours and theirs. And we're going to be doing the same as we craft lessons and classes for our kids and, oh, by the way, our adults of our church. We love our people, and we want to see them grow in every way to be modern-day Josephs. So I invite you once again to be sure to attend our Bible breakfast next Sabbath at 9 a.m. It's going to be a good time, good food, good fellowship, and an opportunity for you to learn about our classes that we're going to be offering for all age groups this fall. And keep your antennae up in the next couple of years as we continue talking about these 5 master threads and where you see them crop up in your classes.